Hi folks, this is a very different talk about Swift from what I'd normally do, but I think it's a very important topic, so I hope you watch the whole video and think about what I've said. This talk is called Who Can Say They've Learned Swift? Now your initial response might be to say, me, I've learned Swift, and perhaps you have learned some of it. You might be building apps with it every day. You might have read all my Swift books and then some. Or maybe you're even the tech lead on a team of Swift developers. But have you learned Swift? Or are you still learning Swift? Have you finished learning? Or are you still finding new things every day you haven't seen before? Are there still parts of the language you've yet to discover? I don't want to waste your time, so I'll get right to the point. I don't think anyone can say accurately they've finished learning Swift. They've gone through everything and mastered the language. This is partly because the language continues to add functionality at a remarkable pace. This is partly because we're still in the process of figuring out what truly idiomatic Swift looks like. But it's partly also because the language is so big now that it has a number of interesting emergent behaviors that are likely to take you by surprise. Are these now de facto features of Swift, or should they be cleaned up and removed? For example, here's a new bug filed a month ago by Joe Groff, SR12583. If you have a function that takes a function, then returns a function that takes another function, you get code like this. And it turns out you can call that function like this. Or like this. But weirdly, not like this. And it's probably the case that none of these should be allowed. But with literally millions of projects using Swift, it's hard to tell how many people are using accidental language quirks like this one. I very clearly remember when I started learning Swift, way back in 2014 when it was announced. I downloaded the Swift reference guide in one lump and absorbed it all in one sitting, the entire thing cover to cover. But even between then and the release of Swift 1.0 about 3 months later, Swift changed a huge amount. For example, this was when arrays and dictionaries stopped being reference types and became value types. Today, we all take it for granted that Swift's arrays are value types, and doing so is what allows us to build large-scale software with Swift. We take hundreds of such things for granted, effectively letting us stand on the shoulders of giants when we build apps. Although we like to think of Swift as being a fairly clean, predictable language, many of the things we take for granted are actually irregular bumps. Things that don't quite fit into how Swift ought to work. But we accept them and move on. For example, think about the relatively simple filter method. Swift developers know that the filter method works on sequences, such as arrays. For example, if I had an array containing one white round marshmallow, then add to my array a second white round marshmallow, and then a third marshmallow. I'm out of hands. 1 second. Sophie?
Yeah?
Can I borrow you, please, darling? Could you come in here? Close the door, please.
Sure.
Here, take a seat next to me and grab one of these curly, colourful marshmallow things. Could you hold up to the camera, please? Thank you. So if I have one of these white round ones here and a second white round one here, and you've got... you eat the marshmallow.
Mm-hmm.
I need that for my talk. All right, grab a second one. Don't eat it. I've got a white round marshmallow here and a second white round marshmallow. No. And a second white round marshmallow here. And you've got a curly, colourful marshmallow here. We can write code to filter these marshmallows. We can say items.filter $0.isWhite and only get back these white round marshmallows.
Can I eat the marshmallow now?
Yes, you can eat the marshmallow now, sure. But why do we know that? We aren't filtering out the white ones, we're filtering in the white ones, which is the inverse of what we'd expect. And why isn't it an in-place operation with a matching filtered method to get a new array? So we all accept that filter works in the opposite way from what we'd expect. And not just in one way, but in two ways. Can you imagine how hard that must be for newcomers to our language? Now things have gotten better since Swift 5.2. Because you used to write code like this. Let result equals items.drop $0.isWhite. But that's even worse than filter. What are we dropping? All white marshmallows? Everything after the first white marshmallow? Swift 5.2 adopted SE0249, letting us use key path expressions as functions, so our code becomes much nicer. Let result equals items.drop while \.isWhite. We can use the same approach with filter, although it still doesn't make it clear what the code actually does. It's easy to imagine that this is just a one-off, and everything else is just plain sailing, but that simply isn't true. Look, do you want to try a quick quiz?
Yeah?
Okay, let's see how we get on. Here's my first question. If I make an implicitly unwrapped optional with the value Paul, then take a copy of it, what type does copy have?
It's a copy, so it must also be an implicitly unwrapped optional.
Yeah, no. The implicitly unwrapped nature of that optional is actually just a flag in Swift, and that flag gets lost when the string's copied, making it as a regular optional. Try this one instead. CG floats use a lot to store numbers in Swift, but what actually is it? Is it a type alias for float or double? Or is it a unique struct in its own right?
I literally have no clue. I don't even know what a type alias is.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a little bit beyond your level. It's actually a unique struct rather than a type alias. But that answer surprises many people because it's not how things used to be in Objective-C. Okay, here's an easier one you can get. What's the difference between these two? Option 1, extension myCollection conforms to codable, where element conforms to codable. And option 2, extension myCollection conforms to encodable, where element conforms to encodable, and the same for decodable.
Oh, I do know that one. The first one will only work if your elements are both encodable and decodable, whereas the second one will allow either half to work independently.
Right. And yet it's common to see folks choose the former without thinking. Codable's been around since Swift 4, and conditional conformances since Swift 4.1, so you'd think we'd have this all figured out by now.
So I didn't do great in your little test. But what's the problem?
The problem is that we're all trying to fix bugs, right? And add new features, and support Apple's new APIs, and make our apps look good on Apple's new devices. It's not easy trying to keep up with all the Swift language changes at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds stressful. How could anyone remember it all?
That's a problem. I'm not sure they can. I've had so many experienced Swift developers take my 100 Days of Swift UI course, and it starts with a 12-day primer introduction to Swift. Sometimes those developers skip the first 15 days, but those who don't are often surprised to find you can separate long numbers using underscores to make them easier to read, or that Swift has multi-line string support.
They seem like fairly common features to not know about.
Yes, but to be fair, in the early days of Swift, there were a lot... Good grief, even the dogs are now coming into this talk. Right, come on, you two. Get one treat each. Come on, here. Come on. Come on, get a treat. Good girl, Aria. Luna, come on, you two. You've had one already. Get down. Get down, you bad dog. Luna, too. Come on. You had one already. You get one, too. There you go. Good dogs. Right, Sophie, get them out, please. Get them out.
Okay, come
Clear off, dogs. Get out.
out. This
is working from home, folks, right here.
Yes, you.
As I was saying, or trying to say, in the earlier days of Swift, before we started writing the Swift, we'd make projects that was perfectly fine, that we used great Swift. And then the next version of Swift would have hundreds of errors. Everything would break. My friend Erica's mostly to blame for that.
Really? And she's your friend?
Well, I'm just kidding about the blame. Erica did a lot to help figure out what modern Swift should look like. Thanks to her, we've moved on to idiom-breaking changes. We use property wrappers in Swift UI, but we can write our own too, and that's allowing us to approach API design differently. It's the same with the result type from Swift 5.
I haven't used that yet.
No, and you won't for a while, I expect, and that's okay. It's just like an optional, except rather than holding a value or nothing, it holds a value or an error.
Oh, nice. So once we've made those idiot-breaking changes, what's next?
Idiom breaking, not idiot breaking.
Sorry.
No idiots were harmed in the making of this talk. Idiom breaking changes are a little harder to make than code breaking changes, because Xcode won't tell you, hey, you should move this API to use result, or this could be a multi-line string. And if it did, it'd probably create weird flashbacks for many people. So it'll take a little longer to bring those changes in. But once we adapt to all the new tools we have to find a new normal, then perhaps we can move on to bigger things.
Yes, I knew it! It's tabs versus spaces, right?
Maybe, yeah. There was actually a Swift evolution proposal February 2019, SE250, an official Swift style guide. Sadly, lots of folks argued about it, so it never happened. But I think it'd been nice to have all that sort of thing agreed and signed off once and for all.
Meh. I think style guides are overrated.
Oh yeah?
Opinions are really divided on some things, such as force unwrapping.
How are opinions divided on force unwrapping?
I think force unwrapping everything is fine, but the rest of the world disagrees with me.
Right. To be fair, it's not like you're really working on mission-critical software. Regardless, February 2019, a Swift style guide proposal comes forward, and then shortly afterwards, WWDC 19 happened. And what came from there?
Swift UI.
Right. And now Xcode needs to be able to generate the Swift code.
Oh, I get it. Xcode needs to write its own Swift code now, which means it needs to have a style guide to use.
Exactly.
So maybe a style guide wasn't such a bad idea. But once past the code breaking changes, the idiom breaking changes, I'm just messing with you.
Okay, carry on.
The idiom breaking changes, and we've got a common style for everyone to use, then we're done, right?
Maybe. Maybe not. Honestly, who knows? What I can say though, is we still have a few big culture changes to make. For example, many people still don't write tests for their code.
No wonder you all drink so much coffee. If everything's always changing that fast, it's amazing that computers work at all.
Well, it wasn't always this way. Before Swift came along, before your time, we used a different language called Objective-C to build our apps. That first appeared in 1984, but Objective-C 2.0 only appeared in 2006, more than 20 years later. 20 years! You're only 10 years old. You can't even imagine what life was like 20 years ago.
Sure I can. You already told me. You didn't have Netflix, you had Blockbuster, which is exactly like Netflix, except you had to argue about what to watch in public, rather than at home.
Exactly. And in fact, it was quite common to get to the Blockbuster store and find someone else was watching what you wanted to watch, so you had to pick something less popular to watch.
What?
Yeah. And you even had to rewind the tape before you returned it.
What?
I'll explain later. The point is that Swift's always been a changing language. It was modern to begin with, adding things like generics, closures, and type inference. But it has continued to leap forward year after year to give us things like guard, codable, conditional conformances, and protocol-oriented programming. And it can be hard to keep up with them all.
But surely, you don't need to actually use all the Swift features, do you?
Well, no, of course not. But you should at least be able to recognize most of them. So if you see raw strings, if hash can import UIKit, or call as function, you at least know what they do, even if you don't use them yourself. You can then go and read up on them before working with the code, rather than trying to memorize everything up front.
So Swift's evolving. Apple's APIs are evolving. And they have new devices to work with?
Exactly. All while, actually trying to ship our own apps.
Do you think it's going to get any easier?
Honestly, no. I really don't. At least not in the short term. Think about it. When Swift 5 came out, folks really might have thought they understood the language. But then 5.1, a minor release, added massive changes. Opaque return types, implicit returns from single expression functions, property wrappers, function builders, and more. Modern Swift code has @signs and $signs all over the place. And for what?
Well, I'm sure you told me. It makes Swift UI easier to write.
Exactly. They're all language features aimed at improving the ergonomics of Swift UI. And you like Swift UI, don't you?
Yep. Glad to be free of storyboards.
So, you like the pickers.
I love the pickers.
And you like the lists.
I love the list.
And you like the collection views?
Wait, there aren't any collection views.
No, there are no collection views in SwiftUI. At least, not yet. Because WWDC is only a month away right now. And it's bound to bring some important change for SwiftUI.
Hang on. I haven't even finished learning the first version of SwiftUI.
Exactly. And we're probably also going to see the first beta of Swift 5.3, bringing features such as multi-pattern catch clauses, synthesized comparable conformance for enums, multiple trading closures, and one big change that'll allow you to remove self in so many places. It's going to really clean up SwiftUI code.
I don't even know what multi-pattern catch clauses are.
Yep, you haven't seen them yet. They look like this. You have your regular do block, and you try running some code. When it comes to catching errors, you can specify multiple different things to catch if you want to. And if you haven't handled every error, you can still add a Pokemon catch to the end, because, you got to catch them all.
Oh, neat. Is that any code useful?
Sure it is. It lets us remove all sorts of code duplication to handle multiple errors in just one place. You can find the same thing in Python, actually.
It's nice that we can share features so much.
It is nice. And it's going to continue. A thing many people out there really want is called async await. It makes it easier to write programs to do several things at the same time.
Is that in Python too?
Yes. In fact, it's very common for other languages to get features first. For example, many other languages already have multi-pattern catch clauses, or async await, or both, including your old friend Python, but also C# and Dart and Kotlin, Rust, JavaScript, Ruby, C++, PHP, and even Visual Basic. This means that developers who make Swift can look around and see how the same problems are solved elsewhere.
And then maybe use all that to figure out what the best solution might be for Swift.
Right. In fact, one of Daddy's friends, Greg, said he really likes to read all the different alternatives considered when a Swift team evaluates changes. You'll often find the team have evaluated the same feature in several other languages, which gives them the chance to see how each change has affected the language.
That sounds brilliant!
It is brilliant. It puts Swift in the enviable position of seeing unintended consequences ahead of time, and hopefully finding a better solution. We're really lucky to be part of the wider community where ideas are shared freely.
How come we ended up with the weird behaviour you mentioned earlier? Is filter working in the opposite way we expect?
Well, no language is perfect, and Swift isn't somehow an exception. Ultimately, we take all the odd behaviour for granted, and we take inspiration extensively from other languages. And that's fine. It's more than fine. It's great. We're all trying to build the best software we can, and that means learning from anywhere we can.
It makes me wonder why some Swift developers put on their page that their site is 100% JavaScript free.
Right. As you've seen, Swift gets ideas from other languages all the time. It's silly to say that we're 100% free of anything. It's disrespectful. Realistically, it's just a simple way of sneering at languages they consider inferior.
It's a bit sad, really.
Honestly, it's deeply exclusionary. We can all stand strong without taking shots at other languages.
So where does that leave Swift?
Well, we've talked about how much the language has changed and continues to change. We've talked about some changes that are still to come, including language changes such as multi-pattern catch clauses and async await, plus culture changes such as taking testing more seriously. We looked at quirky language features such as filter, and behaviours that can take us by surprise, such as the way optionals are copied. And we've looked at how Swift takes inspiration from many other languages, even as some members of our community look down on those same languages.
And I also got to eat a marshmallow.
You did. Here, have another one while I wrap this talk up. So I want to return to the question I asked at the beginning. Who can say they've learned Swift? While someone's initial answer might be straightforward, I hope you can now see the situation's more complex. Between taking quirky things for granted, forgetting features added years ago, trying to keep up with the very many changes that keep on coming, I don't think anyone can. If this is your full-time job, keeping up with Swift, plus Apple's APIs, new devices and more, that's a heck of a lot of work. But I want you to think about what it means for folks who are joining our community, folks who are learning Swift for the first time and having to deal with it all at once. They have a huge amount to learn. And to make matters worse, they might be coming from JavaScript or Python and will feel genuinely unwelcome when they see some folks sneering at those languages. And so I want folks who listen to this talk to take only one action. Yes, you might have learned some interesting Swift trivia along the way, but what I really want is for you to consider what your words and your actions say about our community, particularly to those who are just joining. I love this quote from SONIA GUPTA. Coming from the legal profession where citing sources is required, it's weird to see so little citation of sources in tech talks and blogs. This lack of citations adds to the false impression that people in tech just know all the things they talk and write about. So if you write blog posts or make videos or prepare in-house training or whatever, do you acknowledge you didn't just magically know all those things you're talking about? Do you link to where you learn stuff from to help other folks climb up that same ladder? Do you make it clear to folks who are less experienced that you weren't just somehow born with all your knowledge? Another quote I love is from Patrick McKenzie, who said this: "Every great developer you know got there by solving problems they were unqualified to solve until they actually did it." So when you meet folks who are struggling with the sharp corners of Swift, I want you to remember that you were once there too. When you meet folks coming from languages such as Python or JavaScript, I want you to remember how much of Swift and Swift UI were inspired by those languages. And when you meet folks who are just setting out to learn Swift for the very first time, I want you to remember my answer to the question of this talk. I don't think anyone can say they've learned Swift. We're all still figuring it out. We're all trying to keep up with Apple's new technologies, and we're all sharing what we've learned. I want to end this talk with a quote from Erica Sadun, who I'm very proud to call my friend. "Allow yourself to be professionally stupid. Ask questions, learn new things, be wrong, and grow from that. People who build walls around knowing cannot grow and develop skills. Be more impressed by humble than overconfident." So we might not be able to say that we've learned Swift, but we can be happy to say we don't know something. We can be open and honest about our learning and share how we learn stuff. And I hope we can be humble, because that's exactly the kind of community we should all be striving for. High five. Boom. And with that, I'm done. If you want to ask questions, you can always go...
Wait a minute.
What?
I think this last slide needs some work. If I move your name to the side, I can make a copy of it over here, and then do a little bit of typing. Now move them back into the centre neatly, and we're done. Much better.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks for your help, Sophie. Anyway, if folks have questions, they can find me on Twitter at 2straws.
And they can find me on Twitter at pinkerstraws.
This video was sponsored by Bitrise, who make it super easy to add continuous integration and continuous delivery to your iOS app projects. For more information, go and check them out at bitrise.io. Thanks, Bitrise.
Thanks, Bitrise.